Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. We are super excited to have you today, and we have a ton of information to go over with you. I am Christina Schuyler Allison, Risk Manager for TCEQ's Air Grant Division. In today's presentation, myself and several TCEQ subject matter experts will guide you through the importance of understanding your contract, courtesy eligibility reviews, how to request reimbursement, when to destroy your old equipment, usage, monitoring, reporting, making contract changes, and how to avoid costly mistakes. Here's a quick overview of our grant process starting at the time you receive your fully executed contract. Once you receive your contract signed by both you and TCEQ, it is time for you to purchase your grant equipment. After you have taken possession of your new grant equipment, you will then submit your request for reimbursement, also known as the RFR. Please note to submit your RFR by the deadline stated on your contract to terp-fiscal@tceq.texas.gov. When you receive payment, you will then have 90 days to destroy your old equipment. It is important that you document this process and destruction and submit your disposition form to terp-dispo@tceq.texas.gov. Once TCEQ has approved your disposition, we will notify you to start keeping records, also known as the SKR, for the submission of your annual usage reports. Please welcome our contracts expert and project management section manager, Jody Ibargüen.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, I'm Jody Bargwin, and I'm the manager for the project management section. If you're with us today, that means you have an executed contract for a TERP grant. Congratulations. We are excited to partner with you. We have a long relationship ahead of us, 5 years for most of you, some longer. So for both of us to be successful, we want to go over some important key points in your contract. I will be going through a standard rebate replacement contract. So please note, if you have a grant through another one of our TERP programs, the articles may be numbered slightly different, but the content is basically the same. As Christina pointed out at the beginning, we will be taking a deep dive into various aspects of your grant, such as reimbursement, disposition, making changes to your contract, etc. So if you have specific questions related to those as I move through this contract overview, you may want to jot them down and see if your question is covered when we get to those presentations. Okay, let's take a look at a contract. Here we have a sample rebate contract for ABC Company. They were awarded a grant and they're now moving through the various stages of their contractual requirements. So let's wish them the best of luck as we follow them throughout this presentation. So page 1 here of the contract highlights some basic but key information. Your contract number near the top is our best identifier of you. Now, you're not just a number to us, but this number is important when it comes to communicating with us because it helps us get to your information very quickly. As well, you will need to know this number when you fill out most of our forms, which you will see later on. In the middle section here is your request for reimbursement deadline, and it also has your contract expiration date. The RFR deadline is generally 2 years out from the year you were awarded your contract. This can vary depending on when within that year you were awarded, but in general, this gives you quite a bit of time to meet this deadline. So by this date, you must have purchased, taken possession of, and submitted all required documents to receive reimbursement for all of the activities in your contract. The contract expiration date is the date your contract is set to expire. If you reach the end of your activity life prior to this, then your contract may end sooner. Okay, we'll now get into the next portion of your contract, which is the general terms and conditions. Don't let the term general fool you, and I know this is a hefty section, but there are some very specific and detailed requirements laid out in this section. Here, we address the reimbursement limits. We've highlighted a replacement project, but all projects are addressed here, so if you have something other than a replacement, you can see that in your contract. For a replacement project, please note that you were awarded an amount that matched our grant tables when you applied. However, when you purchase your equipment and submit your RFR packet, we will reimburse the lesser of two amounts, either the grant table amount or a maximum of 80% of the incremental cost of the equipment. So, for example, you were awarded $100,000 and you buy something that costs $101,000. We're going to deduct the default scrap value that's listed in your contract, which for replacements is $1,000. This brings your incremental cost to $100,000. Therefore, we can only reimburse you $80,000 since that's 80% of the incremental cost and is the lesser of the two amounts. But if you purchase something for $150,000, you'll receive the full grant amount. Keep in mind, though, this is all contingent on the review of your RFR packet, which we will get into greater detail later. But this is a key item in your contract to be aware of. Okay, within Article 10, we want to point out the insurance requirement. Please be aware that you are required to insure your grant funded equipment with an insurance policy that will cover the replacement of it if it's lost, stolen, totaled in a fire, etc. The insurance policy must be maintained and active throughout the entire activity life for each piece of equipment in your contract. On this page, within Article 11 of your contract, we cover disposition. As you are aware, for replacement projects, you are required to destroy your old equipment. The purpose of this requirement in our programs is because we're partnering to help clean the air in Texas by removing your older, dirtier pieces of equipment and replacing them with cleaner ones. So the old one can't continue to operate. We have an entire section later in this presentation that covers dispo in greater detail, but the standard dispo process, it requires making a 3-inch hole in both sides of the engine and cutting the frame rails, or just completely destroying it so it can't be repaired and put back into action. Disposition does have a deadline of 90 days once TCEQ pays you for the new purchase. If dispo is not performed properly or not done at all, TCEQ will require you to pay us our money back. Once again, we're in this together and we want all of our grantees to succeed, so please make sure you understand and fully comply with this requirement. Okay, another requirement of our programs is operating the grant funded equipment in the area that you committed to for the percent of time you committed to. You'll receive communication from us to complete a usage report with information on the activity or activities usage for the previous year. This is also covered in greater detail later in the presentation, but note that this is a key part of your contract requirement with us over the 5+ year activity life. Any breach of this requirement can also result in returning some or all of the grant funds. Okay, further into your contract, we have an authorized representative page. So when you applied for the grant, you listed the authorized official and you listed the project representative. If at any time throughout the life of this contract, one or both of these folks no longer fill this role, please reach out to us as soon as possible so we can update our records with the new person or people. The authorized official, as you know, is the person that signed the application, they signed the contract, and they will sign various documents throughout the contract life, as you'll see later on. The project representative is our main go to person for communication and overall management of the contract. All right, now we get into the meat of the contract, the scope of work. This is a detailed portion of the contract that digs into the specific activity or activities. In Article 1, we list the assigned activity numbers for each equipment. As we move throughout the next 5+ years of your contract life, we refer to your haul truck or your tractor, etc., by an activity number that we assign to it, such as activity 001, 002, etc. And this activity number will apply to both the old and the replacement piece of equipment. In Article 2, we have the activity life. The activity life for each activity starts once disposition is approved for the old equipment. We'll get into this later, but we will notify you of the official start and end dates for each activity. Next, we have the annual usage commitment. This table shows the percent of usage that needs to be met within the eligible counties that are listed. Okay, the grant equipment table has limited information in the table. However, please pay close attention to the list of requirements highlighted here. We're not going to go through these individually, but please read your scope of work. And if you have any questions or concerns about these requirements, please reach out to us before you make your purchase. And lastly, in the scope of work is the individual grant amount for each activity. And again, we reinforce here the reimbursement limit that I went over earlier about the lesser of the grant amount listed here or 80% of the incremental cost. Please note, though, that the percent here may vary depending on the program you're awarded a grant under, so make sure you check your contract. Okay, that concludes the overview of our contract. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you, Jody. Please welcome Project Management's team lead, Gabrielle Arzola.
Good afternoon. I am Gabrielle Arzola, team lead of the project management team, and I will be covering requesting a courtesy eligibility review. A courtesy eligibility review can help save you from purchasing a piece of equipment that could be ineligible. Once you have found a piece of equipment you would like to purchase, prior to purchasing, you can send your equipment information to the project management team, who can perform a preliminary review of your equipment to see if it fits both your program and contract requirements. You can download an equipment vehicle inquiry form from our website and send the form along with any helpful photos to terp_revise@tcq.texas.gov. We are only able to perform a review based on the items provided. If you can only provide a product brochure, our review will be conditional based only on that brochure. The gold standard of information we like to receive is the equipment year, photos of the equipment itself, and an engine data plate photo showing the engine family code. Now let's take a look at the inquiry form together. With each form, we request that Section 1 always be filled out so we know the who, what, and when of this inquiry request. Section 2 is where you will add the equipment information of your proposed equipment. In Section 3, you can add any additional comments that may assist with your change request. Including any photos will be helpful with your inquiry. You can send your completed form along with those helpful photos to us at terp_revise@tcq.texas.gov. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Now let's give a big warm welcome to Financial Reimbursements Section Manager, Bethany Blackstone.
Thanks, Christina. Again, I'm Bethany Blackstone. I am the manager of the financial reimbursement section, and I'm going to be walking you through today how to request your reimbursement. Before you can submit your request for reimbursement, or RFR, you need to have two things be true. Number one, you need to have a contract signed by TCEQ in hand. And number two, you need to have purchased and taken possession of the grant equipment. Step one of the RFR process is to go out and actually purchase or lease your grant equipment. There are some important things you need to take into consideration when you're doing this. First off, you can buy or lease your grant equipment from any dealer in the U.S. or from auction. However, you cannot buy or lease the grant equipment from a direct family member, friend, neighbor, etc. There needs to be an arm's length transaction that's happening in the purchase or lease. You also should be considering asking for an itemized invoice when you make that purchase or lease. We want to see the grant equipment listed on the invoice because you're going to need to submit that with your RFR. If you are considering a lease, there's some things you need to keep in mind that are very important. Your lease term must be a term that extends the end of the activity life or have a binding commitment to purchase at the end of the term. So, Jody mentioned earlier when we were going over the scope of work that the activity life starts when TCEQ approves disposition of the old grant equipment. If you have an activity life of 5 years, a lease term of 5 years would not be sufficient, right? So when you're looking at leases, you want to build in kind of a runway, a few months, because if you think about it, before you can submit your request for reimbursement, you've got to take possession, then you submit the request for reimbursement, we review and approve it, issue payment, then you go out and do disposition of the old, we approve it. That may take a couple of months. So you need to keep this in mind if you're considering a lease and, really think about building in time for all these steps to happen. Another important consideration while you are going out and purchasing or leasing your grant equipment is thinking about who the reimbursement is going to be issued to. So if you borrow funds to pay for the grant equipment or you end up leasing it, TCEQ is going to issue the reimbursement to your lender or lessor. However, if you pay an amount equal to or greater than your grant amount with cash on hand or non-borrowed funds, TCEQ will issue the reimbursement directly to you, the performing party. This is going to be important later on in this process when we walk through our RFR forms, so just keep this in mind. Step 2 is going to be taking clear color photos of your new grant equipment and obtaining a copy of the new vehicle registration if this is for an on-road project. So when we're talking about photos, we want to see a full side view of the grant equipment, and then we want to see a photo or photos, plural, of the engine data plate that clearly show the engine make, model, serial number, engine family code, and manufacturer year. You're going to think or sound like a broken record, but please label each picture with the corresponding activity number from your scope of work. This is a common theme in the next slides. Okay, let's look at some examples of great photos for reimbursement. On-road piece of equipment. Here we've got a dump truck. We can see it from the front to the back. We can see all of the wheels and axles. This is a great example. For the engine data plate photo, this is a great example too, because we can see very clearly our engine family code at the top left. We've got our model number, we've got our make, we've got our serial number, and we also have our manufacturer year. Let's look at a non-road example. Here we've got an ag tractor. We can see the entire piece of equipment, including the tires. Note that it doesn't really matter if we're seeing a picture from the left or the right, driver's side, passenger side, as long as it's from the side and we're able to see the entire piece of equipment. And then in this example, all of the data that we need is across 2 different plates. So we've got 2 photos. That's much better than taking one very zoomed out photo where, some of that required information is not visible or it's fuzzy. We'd rather see separate photos as long as we get all of that required information. Step 3 in the reimbursement process is to actually go gather your proof of purchase documents for the grant equipment. So you will need to provide an itemized and dated invoice, bill of sale, purchase order, as long as the purchase order is issued by the vendor and not you, a lease agreement, or any equivalent that clearly identifies who you purchased from, right? We need to see the dealer, vendor, subcontractor, etc. We need to see that specific piece of equipment received on the invoice. Again, we want to see your grant equipment spelled out on that invoice. We also want to see that the performing party on your contract was the party billed for the invoice. This is a very important piece of information. So let's say in our example, ABC Company is our performing party on the grant contract we've been looking at. If John Doe, as the owner of this company, goes out and buys his piece of equipment as an individual and the invoice is in his name, we're going to have an issue when it comes time for reimbursement. We would have to add John Doe as an additional party to the contract in order to move forward with reimbursement. Therefore, it's really important to consider whose name is on the invoice when you are making your purchase and make sure it matches the performing party name that is on your contract. Another item that is important to have on the itemized invoice is the amount billed to the performing party. So obviously we need to know how much you were billed for the equipment, and then any past due amount from previous invoices. Again, label each proof of purchase document with the corresponding activity number. Step 4 is to gather your proof of payment documents for your grant equipment. So you may remember the previous slide where we talked about if the reimbursement is going to be issued directly to you or to your lender. If you purchase the grant equipment outright or you made a down payment, your proof of payment might be a copy of the front and back of a canceled check, copy of a cashier's check, bank confirmations of ETF, ACHs, wire transfers, etc. It could be a bank statement. It could be a credit card receipt or statement. Any of these work. If you borrowed money to purchase the equipment or you leased it, your proof of payment needs to include all pages of any financing, loan, or lease agreement that you have. Again, please label each proof of payment document with the corresponding activity number from your scope of work. So step 5 is going to actually be completing the RFR form. You can access this form by going to our website, terpgrants.org. At the top center of the page, you're going to see a current grantees tab. It'll have a drop down. You'll select reimbursements and you will find the RFR form. Every RFR needs to have pages 1 and 2 of the RFR form filled out. Page 3
is going to be the activity detail page. You're going to need an activity detail page that is specific to your project filled out. Most of you, if you have a replacement project for our rebate grant program, our ERAG grant program, our SPY program, etc., you're going to be filling out form page 3. But if you have a repower project, or if you have, for instance, a Texas Clean School Bus grant, it may be a different page number, but that activity detail table will be labeled for your grant program and your project type. So just make sure you check that. Now, when you are filling out the RFR form, you need to make sure that wherever there's an indication for a signature, that it's the authorized official as listed in your contract that is signing that. It cannot be the designated project representative. It must be the authorized official. Let's take a look at the RFR form. All right, so this is RFR form page 1. At the very top, we're filling in our contract number, and we're pulling that directly from the front page of our contract. We're also putting in the performing party name exactly as it is on your contract signature page. For the activity numbers, this is going to be what activities you are claiming on this request for reimbursement. If you have multiple activities on your contract, you can submit a request for reimbursement for each activity individually. You can do them all together or any combination of the two. But you're going to pull this activity number from your scope of work, as Jody went over that before. So in this instance, ABC Company only has one activity, so their activity number is 001. If they had a contract with 5 activities and they only wanted to claim 3 activities at this point, activities 1, 3, and 5, they would fill in 001, 003, 005, and the other 2 activities would be claimed at a different time. When you're putting in the total amount requested for above activities, this is going to be the sum of all activities that you are requesting at this time. You can get this from the last page of your scope of work, where we have the activity grant amounts. It's the very last article of your contract. You would just add that up for every activity that you were claiming on this RFR. Next, you're going to answer the question of whether or not you have received or anticipate receiving any non-TERP grant funds or financial incentives associated with the grant. If you, for instance, received another grant, say like a federal grant for a bus, if the answer is yes to this question, you need to give us the details of that. We need to know the how much and the when and etc. But if the answer is no, you just click no and move on to the next section. So every RFR is going to have the performing party certification section filled out. Again, this needs to be the authorized official from your contract signing this. Below that is the release of claims. This is going to be signed by the authorized official only if this is the final request for reimbursement on the contract. In the instance of ABC Company here, they only have one grant activity on their contract, so the one RFR is going to be the final request, and they sign this. However, in our example, as mentioned before, if you have 5 activities, you're only claiming activities 1, 3, and 5 now, and you're waiting on 2 and 4 later, you would not sign the release of claims. Let's look at page 2. So this top portion is very important. This should be filled out on every single RFR. This is going to be the address where the check should be sent. Now, if you, again, paid an amount equal to or greater than the grant amount with cash on hand or non-borrowed funds, TCEQ can issue the reimbursement directly to you, the performing party. In that instance, you would put your performing party name exactly as it is on the contract, and then you would put the address you want us to send the check to. In this instance, you would not fill out the bottom portion of page 2. However, if you financed or borrowed money or leased the grant equipment, we will have to assign the payment to that lender or lessor. In that instance, you would put your lender's name as the assignee entity name at the top line of the page, and then you would put in the address for them where we would send the check to them. You would also need to fill out the assignment request and acceptance section. The top portion of this is going to be the printed name and signature of your authorized official on your contract. And then we're going to need the assignee name. So again, your finance company, your lessor, and then an authorized representative from that financing company would need to sign here. This is an agreement to assign just the payment to be applied to the principal or the lease cost basis, and not to be applied to any like finance fees, interest, charges, etc. It's not assigning the contract to them. It is just assigning the payment, and they are agreeing to apply the payment as outlined here. So let's move on to page 3. For most of you, basically the activity detail page. So this is an activity detail page for a replacement project. At the very top of the page, it's going to say what types of projects and what grant programs it's for. If you have any questions about this, when you're filling this out, making sure you selected the correct activity table, please feel free to reach out to us. We can help you with that. At the very top of the page, it's going to have a question of whether or not you've taken possession of the equipment that's listed below. You're going to say yes, because you have to have taken possession before you could submit your request for reimbursement. If you have a repower project, it's going to ask a slightly different question. It's going to ask, has the equipment been put back into service? In which case you would need to say yes to be able to move forward. When we're filling out your activity detail table, you need to fill it out with the information for your new piece of equipment. Most of this information you can pull from a combination of your invoice and your engine plate sticker. For the final column on here, the activity grant amount, you're going to pull that from the activity grant amounts table, which is the last article of your scope of work. Step 6 in the process is to compile your RFR packet and email it to terp-fiscal@tcq.texas.gov. This is the email address you'll send your RFR for. And then also, if you have any questions when you're trying to fill out your RFR forms, you can send them to this email address as well. A completed RFR packet includes the photos we took in step 2, as well as the registration document if you have an on-road piece of equipment. It's going to include the proof of purchase documents from step 3, the proof of payment documents from step 4, and then your completed RFR form, which should be 3 pages in step 5. And then our final step, step 7, is to wait to receive the reimbursement check in the mail. So some things to keep in mind: your reimbursement processing time is highly dependent on the complexity and completeness of your RFR, your responsiveness to requests for additional information, and also any changes to your contract that may require an amendment. So let's say, for instance, in our example we mentioned above, ABC Company is our performing party on our contract, but John Doe, as the owner of ABC Company, went out and purchased the equipment, and it's all in his name. We would need to do an amendment to add him as an additional party to the contract before we can move on with reimbursement. Similarly, let's say we purchased it in ABC Company's name, but they go out and buy a tractor and it doesn't quite match the requirements that's listed in their scope of work. If it is something that meets the requirements of the program and we would allow, we would need to amend our contract before we move forward so that it matches the equipment that was actually purchased. That could hold up the request for reimbursement process. One way to avoid this particular thing is to actually do the courtesy eligibility review that Gabrielle mentioned before, so that you get an idea ahead of time if this is going to impact your contract. Now, once TCEQ has approved your RFR, the comptroller will issue payment. It's going to be in the form of a check, and it's going to be mailed via USPS to the address that was listed at the top of RFR page 2. So that's why it was very important for that to be a good address. That is it for reimbursement. I'm going to hand it back over to Christina.
Thank you, Bethany. Now let's get to the fun part. Please welcome Compliance Section Manager Dana Johnson.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Christina. My name is Dana Johnson, and I am the manager for the compliance section. And we're going to talk about destroying your old equipment, which you all may commonly know as the disposition of your old equipment. So now that we've gone over the contract and we've talked about the reimbursement, we will discuss the next steps in the process, which is destroying the old equipment. We will go through the process of collecting the required documentation, completing the disposition form, and compiling those documents to submit for review. I will also highlight some things that are really important for you to be aware of in order to stay in compliance with your contractual requirements of destroying your piece of equipment. Please note that it is very important that you provide all the documentation that is requested, as we will send a request for the return of grant funds if you fail to properly dispose of your piece of equipment. As referenced here, you have 90 days to submit proof of destruction to the TCEQ. And that's 90 days from when the reimbursement was issued, whether it's issued to you, the grantee, or to your finance company. You have 90 days to provide that documentation. Standard method of disposition includes making a 3-inch or larger hole in both sides of the engine. It also includes cutting the frame rails, deeming the equipment as inoperable. You also have the option of completely crushing the equipment, which includes the engine. This is not very common, but if you choose this option and have questions, please reach out to the compliance sections with any questions. If you have alternative disposition, please note that it must be approved by the TCEQ in writing, and we will have to add that condition to the scope of work of your contract. Alternative disposition is not very common, but if you have any questions in regards to that, please reach out to us and we will walk you through that process. Step 1. This is mainly if you have an on-road piece of equipment. If you have an on-road piece of equipment, you will be required to provide a non-repairable title as proof of documentation that your equipment is being disposed of. So do not give your title away. We've run into the situation to where a lot of grantees, for whatever reason, whether they give it to the salvage yard or what have you, they do not have access to their non-repairable title. You're going to need the title in order to obtain that non-repairable title from the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles. If you go to the website that's listed here, make sure that you search for the VTR 441 form and you can download and complete that form. One thing to keep in mind on the actual application for the non-repairable title, there's 2 options that you can choose. One being the salvage title. The other option is the non-repairable title. We have, in situations, received a salvage title. Unfortunately, we are not able to use the salvage title as proof that the equipment is destroyed. We need you to select the option of the non-repairable title instead of the salvage title. If you have any questions as you're going through the process, we are available and we can answer any questions for you. One thing that I wanted to mention in regards to the non-repairable title, it may take some time for you to obtain the non-repairable title. That's why we make that the first step of the process, because you can, while you're waiting on the non-repairable title to be issued, you can be going through the process of actually compiling the other documents, which we're going to go through now. So step 2 is before you destroy your equipment, we need you to take color photos of the equipment. Bethany spoke on this as she was looking at the request for reimbursement, the photos that were required. We need good color photos of the equipment. For disposition purposes, we want to see the left and the right side of the equipment, see each side of the equipment, which includes the frame rails. So it's best if you step at least 3 feet away so that we can get a clear picture of everything that's in the photo. We also want the left and the right side of the engine. That should include any identifying marks or labels that are already on the engine. We would like for you to identify where the holes in the engine block and where the frame cuts are going to be cut. So typically what we see is that grantees will spray paint the area beforehand of where they're planning on applying the holes in the engine and where they're planning on cutting the frame rails. We also need for the pictures to be labeled. If it's a single activity contract, we don't need for you to label the picture as activity 1. But if you have a multi-activity contract, we do ask that you label the activities 001, 002, so on and so forth, so that we can clearly know which picture is associated with which activity. Also, please note that if you submitted before pictures with your application, those photos will not be accepted as proof of before photos for the disposition. So it will have to be a new set of photos that you submit with your disposition. Step 3. Now that you have destroyed your piece of equipment, we want to see the after photos of the equipment being destroyed. The same as we talked about for before, we want to see the same thing after. We need to see the destroyed left and the right side piece of equipment. We want to know that both frame rails are cut. we want to see the left and the right side of the engine with the holes applied, and those holes should be 3 inches or larger on each side of the engine. And we want to also be able to see the marks that were identified in the before photos as well. The best thing is to maybe zoom in and take pictures that are close up, and also step at least 3 feet away so that we can get a clear picture of the equipment and the engine. Now we're going to go through some examples of photos that have been submitted for dispositions that were approved. Here we can clearly see the full left and the right side of the piece of equipment, including the engine. For this non-road ag tractor, this is a close-up of the engine, both the left and the right side. Now the grantee has provided photos of where they're planning on applying the holes in the engines and where they're planning on doing the frame cuts. We can clearly identify where they're going to apply the cuts to the equipment. And this is just a close-up of where they're planning on applying the cuts. In this, we can clearly see on both the left and the right side that they applied the hole to both the left and the right side of the engine. And they actually, instead of just going straight through and cutting the frame, they actually cut a chunk out of the frame, which we really like and we appreciate. And then here's a close-up. We can clearly see that this is the opposite side of the engine just because of the pieces of equipment that are on the engine on each side. And we can clearly see that there's been a chunk cut out of the frame. This is an example of an on-road piece of equipment. This particular contract has more than one activity. So as you can see here, they have clearly labeled that this particular disposition is for activity 1. They have the left and the right side of the equipment, the full view of the equipment. They've also taken clear photos of the engine on both the left and the right side. In this particular case, you can see that there are identifying marks on the engine. If you look at the picture for the before left side of the engine, you can clearly see at the top right of the engine 100271. Those are identifying marks that if you do not spray paint the area where you're applying the hole, we can clearly see this piece of equipment is what was disposed of after the fact. So let's look at the after pictures and see if we can identify this piece of equipment. As I said in the slide before, we can see the identifying marks of the 100271 on both sides of the left and the right side of the engine. And we can clearly see where the holes were applied on the engine. We get 2 photos of the cut frame rails, but I don't really have a concern with the frame rails being cut here because we can clearly see that they're cut on both sides. Here's an example of a school bus, the before pictures of a school bus. The left and the right side of the bus we can clearly see. And it's a little fuzzy on this particular picture, but there's also a number that's tied to that school bus close to the doors that we can also use as identifying marks to identify the school bus. These are the before pictures of the engine of the school bus. Some engines look the same, some don't. In this particular photo, specifically on the left side of the engine, we can clearly see that there's a color, it looks like a Tiffany green color of the engine or one of the parts in the engine cavity. So we can use that as something to identify that this is the right piece of equipment, plus the parts that are associated on both the left and the right side. Now, in this case, they may not have spray painted the area where they're planning on applying the holes in the engines, but it's marked on the before pictures of where they're planning on applying the holes. There are also parts and colors that are on these photos that we can also use to help identify and confirm the after pictures that provided were also the before pictures. And these are the after pictures of the engine. We can see the left and the right side. We identified this particular photo. One thing that we can look at is the color of the part that's in the engine. It's the teal green or the Tiffany blue that's on the engine for the right side. And then we see the left side of the engine. We can clearly tell that that's at least a 3-inch hole as well on the engine. Also, we've highlighted the frame cuts on the school buses on both the left and the right side. So now that you've completed the actual destruction of your equipment, we need you to compile the documentation needed to submit to the TCEQ. The next step would be for you to download the disposition form, and you can do that by going through terpgrants.org and navigating to current grants and selecting the disposition form. You must complete sections 1 through 6 of the disposition form, and you must sign and date the disposition form where it's indicated on the form. Please note that the disposition form must be signed by either the authorized official or the designated project representative, and we refer to them as the AO or the DPR respectively. We will go through how to complete the actual disposition form now. Here is an example of sections 1 and 2 of the disposition form. Section 1 may look pretty standard because it's pretty close to what you will see on the request for reimbursement form and some of our other forms that you may have submitted to the TCEQ. Please make sure that all areas of the form are filled out, your contract information, the name on the contract, and any contact information, your phone, email address, mailing address. One thing that I will point out, if there are ever any changes to your phone number, your email address, the mailing information, or any of the contact information, that you reach out to us as soon as possible so that we can work with you to assure that we have it updated in our system. We use your phone number, your email address, and your mailing address to contact you if needed. Section 2 of the form is new. What we're seeking here is for the who completed the actual destruction of your equipment. If you complete it yourself, it's pretty self-explanatory. Provide that information. But if it's completed by a salvage yard or someone else, we ask that that information be provided. It just gives us an idea of who's doing what to know that they're following instructions and things like that if we need to confirm the destruction of your equipment. This again may look pretty similar to what you submit as a detailed activity for your request for reimbursement. But in section 3 of the disposition form, the information that needs to be added is the information for the old piece of equipment, not the new piece of equipment. We need to know which activity you're seeking approval for, the last 4 digits of the VIN or the equipment ID, and the equipment make and model. This should match the information that was submitted in your application. Please make sure that you are disposing of the correct piece of equipment as listed in your scope of work. Section 4 and Section 5 of your disposition form. Section 4 is pretty handy. It's just a new part of the checklist where you can use to assure that you've gotten all the documentation together and you're ready to submit. It just gives you a checklist to make sure you have pulled all of the photos and you have all of the documentation that's provided. So in this example here, they've provided left and the right side pictures of the equipment, the main structural component. We want to see the full piece of equipment before destruction, and also the photos of the left and the right side of the engine. And they've also checked off that they have submitted the photos for the left and right side of the frame rails and the engines. If this is an on-road piece of equipment, it also has the area to confirm that you've requested your non-repairable title and you have that ready to submit. That may be a little timelier, so we ask that you do that early on in the process. Section 5 is for alternative disposition. Again, this is not something that is very common, but this is the area where you can confirm that you have provided all of the documentation to prove that you have completed your alternative disposition. Section 6 is where you certify to what you are submitting. This can be signed by the AO or the DPR, which is the authorized official or the designated project representative. You must sign and print the name, add your title and the date that you've completed. And as you can see here, it has the information for where to submit your form. The quickest way to submit your form is by emailing it to TERP, TERP -dispo at tceq.texas.gov. You also have the option of sending it through USPS mail. Well, I will say, make sure that you maintain access to your destroyed piece of equipment until you receive something in writing from the TCEQ before you get rid of it. Step 5. You've compiled everything, you've downloaded and you've completed your form. This is just information as far as making sure what needs to be included in your packet. It has the information of where you can email the packet to. For on-road vehicles, make sure that you have a copy of your non-repairable title, which is listed as step 1 in the presentation. We also want to make sure that you have color photos of the equipment before it's destroyed, as referenced in step 2, and also color photos of the equipment after it's destroyed, as listed and detailed in step 3. Step 4, of course, talks about the completed and the disposition form. All of that should be included for proof that your equipment has been destroyed. Once we receive your disposition and we complete the review of your disposition, we will send you a Start Keeping Records letter. The Start Keeping Record letter is like I said, that you will receive it once the disposition has approved, and it will include information about your activity start and end dates. As listed in the scope of work of your contract, you have a term for the activity life, which means that you must own and operate that piece of equipment throughout the activity life. So once your disposition is approved, the start of your activity life begins, and you will receive that in writing through the Start Keeping Records letter. So we've talked about the contract, you've talked about reimbursement, and we've talked about the disposition. Now let's talk about the requirements for confirming that you're in compliance with the terms of your contract. Monitoring and reporting. For the duration of the activity life of your contract, you must own and lease your piece of equipment. It must be registered within the state of Texas, and you must operate that equipment when and where you say you are, as referenced in the contract's scope of work. As referenced on the Start Keeping Records letter that you will receive after disposition is approved, you must maintain your usage and records of when and where you operate. And we also ask that if there are any amendments or changes that are made to your contract, that you keep documents and record of those changes. We also ask that you maintain the grant equipment in proper working condition throughout the activity life of your contract. And you must maintain insurance of the grant equipment as well throughout the activity life of your contract. Please note, if for whatever reason, say your equipment was totaled, the insurance will help cover the replacement of that equipment. If your equipment needs to be replaced, please reach out to us within a timely manner, we say within 30 days, to notify us of the issue that you may be experiencing with your equipment that may keep you from operating in the terms of your contract. And we can work with you to see if a new piece of equipment is eligible to be added to the contract in place of. This is an example of records that have been kept and submitted to the TCEQ. Essentially, you need to keep records of when you're operating, where you're operating, and how much you're operating. And you should keep records based on how it's listed in your contract, whether it's miles or hours. In this particular example here, we can clearly see when the piece of equipment was operated. We can clearly see where they operated the equipment, whether it was in area or out of area. And we also see how much they operated the equipment. In this particular example, and one thing I want all of you to be very aware of, make sure that you are operating the equipment when you say you are, and you're also operating in the area that's listed in the terms of your contract. If for whatever reason you need to change the area that you're operating the piece of equipment, we ask that you reach out to us as soon as possible so that we can work with you and potentially add the new area to your contract. In this particular example, they are still operating at least 82% in area, so there are no issues with where they're operating. But at the end of the activity life, if you are operating out of area more than you're allowed to in your contract, we will ask for the return of grant funds. So please keep that in mind and make sure that you're aware that you are operating the equipment in area. Completing your usage report. During the activity life of your contract, you will be asked to submit usage reports to the TCEQ. On an annual basis, we will send you a request to submit your usage report. We will send that request by email for you to submit your usage report through our online submission portal, which we refer to as SUNS. Use the records that you have been maintaining throughout the activity life of your contract or for that year to report the usage through the online portal. This is an example of what the screen will look like if you log on to complete your usage report. This is the fastest method for completing your usage. One thing that I want to point out, it's very easy to log in and to get to your usage report, but pay close attention and make sure that you note exactly how you log in to the SUNS portal. In this particular example, it's John Doe, and I will go over this a little more towards the end when you have to submit the actual usage. But here you have your first and your last name, the email address, you confirm it, and you hit login. There are lots of options here that are on the navigation to TERP screen, but you're going to select the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan in order to submit your usage report. So you select TERP, and then you're going to select New TERP Activity because we're wanting to create the usage report for the activity that you're reporting on. Select TERP Online Usage Report and select Next. Here, you're going to add the contract information and you're going to add the last 4 digits of your VIN or the equipment ID. If you have multiple contracts, please make sure that you have each contract with you as you're reporting. If you have multiple activities on a specific contract, you can choose any activity that you provide the last 4 digits for. So say, for example, if you have 5 activities on a contract and the first one that you see on the contract that you want to add here is activity 4. You can add the last 4 digits here for activity 4 if you choose to, and you select search. In here, you just confirm that the contract that you're wanting to submit your usage report is the correct one. Some of you may have multiple contracts and you want to make sure the information that you're providing is for the correct contract. One thing I want to reiterate is make sure that if you need to update any contact information, whether it be the AO or the DPR or the mailing address or the phone number, that you reach out to us directly. One thing I want to point out to you, if the AO or the DPR does not sign the usage report, we cannot accept the usage that you all submit for us to review. Confirm the contract. Now, once you confirm your contract, this creates your actual usage report. I would advise all of you to write down your reference number before you hit next. This is what the actual usage report is going to look like on our online portal. Some things to keep in mind here. One, in this particular situation, you're going to see the activity, the start and the end dates, the area that you're expected to operate the piece of equipment. That's why it's very important for you to make sure that what you're reporting on is the correct contract and the piece of equipment. We're also, of course, going to pay close attention to the odometer in reading. The odometer in reading that we want to see entered here is the reading for the end of the reporting period. So in this particular case, we want to know what the odometer reading was on December 31st, 2024. We also want to know if you operated out of area. You can add that as you see in section 15 of the report, and the usage in area will be added to section 16. Another thing that I want you all to keep in mind, we know that there are times where you have certain issues with your piece of equipment, whether it's in the shop for a period of time, hopefully not a lot, or there are just any issues that may prohibit you from operating the piece of equipment throughout the term of the activity life. Make sure that you note any issues or problems on the report. If it's something that's keeping you from reporting for that particular year, you must notify us by phone call and in writing within 30 days of the issue. We talked before about the reference number. Of course, you documented what your reference number was and the submitter's name. It's very important that you know how you logged into the system. So what I would suggest is that you copy the submitter's name in this particular situation, John Doe, as referenced up top, and paste it to the submitter's signature at the bottom of the page. The reason I say that is some of you may have an initial. Sometimes you may sign it with the initial and sometimes without it. Even if you, in this particular case, if it was John R. Doe, if they added a period logging into the system, but they didn't add a period when they submitted their signature, it's that sensitive. It will not allow you to submit your usage report. So that's why I suggest that you copy the name from the submitted signature up top and add it to the bottom. There's also a couple of areas where you're going to have to affirm the contract that everything that you've submitted is submitted to the best of your knowledge and understanding, and also confirming you understand that by typing your name, you're actually signing the information that's provided. And then you electronically sign your report, and you're going to do this throughout the activity life of your contract. We ask that you make sure that you update your contact information as needed. Make sure that you maintain adequate records of your usage and that you report timely and throughout the end of the activity life. If we do not receive a usage report, we will request a return of grant funds. Always communicate with us if there are any issues. Thank you. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you so much, Dana. That was a lot of information. Our next presenter, please welcome back Project Management's Team Lead, Gabrielle Arzola.
Thank you, Christina. Hello again, Gabrielle here. We understand that many things can happen during the activity life of your contract, and we strive to work with our grantees to make sure they stay contractually compliant to successfully reach end of project. Some of these changes can include a change to the authorized official or project representative, changing your operating area, canceling one or more activities, and total equipment failure, where you want to replace your equipment to stay in the program. To make any change to your contract, download the contract change request form from our website and send the form along with any additional items or photos to terp_revise@tceq.texas.gov. A member of the project management team will review your request to see if it complies with your program and contract requirements and may reach out if additional information is needed. In the case your requested change results in a minor change or an amendment to your contract, a contract specialist will work with you on completing that change and making sure you receive an executed contract change document. We can now take a look at the contract change request form together. With each form, we request that section 1 always be filled out so we know the who, what, when of this change request. You can fill out one or more of the following sections below that best suits your requested contract change. You can fill out section 2 if you would like to make a change to your contracted equipment. Section 3 is if you would like to make a change to your operating area. Section 4 is if you would like to cancel one or more activities. Section 5 is if you're requesting to change the authorized official or project representative. And Section 6 must be filled out, which explains your reason for the change request. Now you can fill out Section 7 if you have a change that was not previously mentioned in the categories above. And in Section 8, you could please add any additional comments that may assist with your change request. You can send your completed form to us at terp_revise@tceq.texas.gov. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Okay, so let's go over how to avoid costly mistakes. Let's make sure your grant equipment meets contract requirements. Please remember you can reach out to us for a courtesy eligibility review if you're unsure. Destroy the piece of equipment and make sure you destroy the correct one. Submit your dispo packet by the deadline. Maintain possession or access to your old equipment until you receive the Start Keeping Records letter. Maintain ownership of the grant equipment during the life of your contract. Notify us within 30 days if your equipment is taken out of operation. Understand your contract to ensure you are operating the equipment properly. Submit your usage reports, and when in doubt, please reach out. Here are a couple of QR codes that I'll leave up for a few seconds for you to grab pictures of. The first one is for our son's user guide in submitting your online usage reports. The second one is to this publication of I just received a TERP grant, now what? You can contact us at terp@tceq.texas.gov. Our phone number is 800-919-8377, and our website is terpgrants.org.